Hey module makers, I'm David, the creative director of Modulus. Welcome to Modulus Academy, where I give you my top tips for peak optimization. Today we're gonna talk a little bit about painting and paint efficiency. It's a topic that comes up a lot because, at some point you might be frustrated you're not creating enough paint, and here's some tips and some advice on how you can get the most out of your paint. So I've created a bit of a setup which I'm not particularly proud of because I deliberately made it not so paint efficient. To help you in this example, we're going to build the modules of the droid assembly. So they're using blue paint. In this setup I've made here, we're not really doing it in an efficient way. But previously we talked about operator efficiency, and that is kind of okay in this case. So we are actually using all the resources, all the blocks to make exactly 15 per minute of each, which is good. But in this scenario here, we're using 45 paint per minute, which is quite a lot to make only 45 modules, right? So let me go over what a potential issue could be here. So I'm using the two cubes, they're going in, and I'm using 3 painters to paint the parts of the individual modules. As you can see, this first module is completely blue, the second one is partly blue, and the third one as well. So what often is a reflex is to start making these modules and then splitting them up and painting the individual parts blue. So that's kind of what I did here. So you can see here I'm stamping out this cube, then cutting it, and then making the first module and a part of the second module that I both want painted blue. So what I'm doing here is I'm using a painter to paint this first module blue to create this one. I'm using a painter to paint this second module blue that is then combined with the other cube to make the actual module. And then with the leftover of the stamper, I'm actually creating module 3, which I partly dyed blue here as well. So I'm quite effectively making all the modules in a kind of a logic way. But the only downside here is I'm using 45 paint per minute. Now that's like a lot, especially if you start expanding your factory, you want to be kind of conservative with your paint usage. So this is kind of like an efficient setup, but not really efficient on the paint. So I've made another one that is a bit different. So it's still efficient, it's still making the same amount of modules, but in this case I'm only using 15 paint per minute, which is like 3 times less and way more efficient than the other setup. And the way to think about it is, again, the order of operations. So in this scenario here, I'm painting the cube before doing all the operations on it. So I'm just using half of the cubes here and painting them blue and then doing the operations. So here I'm stamping the piece out that's already painted and making these pieces again. But I don't have to use the painter anymore because I've painted the original cube blue, so the blue just remains and I'm not using any other painter in the process. And the same logic goes for this module. I'm using this blue part to make that one. This one was already blue, so it's done already. And basically what the excess of the stamper does here, it's already blue. So the only thing I have to do is turn it back into white, which is free. Monotoners are free, they don't consume any resources. So in that case, I'm just using one painter to paint all of the parts before actually assembling them. The output is the same, but the paint consumption is only 15 per minute. So that is very interesting to think about when you're starting production of colored modules. How can you change the order of operations to effectively lower your paint consumption? So that's kind of the basics of this. And to end, I wanted to show you even a more advanced technique that you could use later in your factories, where you can even conserve more paint than this. So this is just an example, but here I'm using 4 furnaces, which I'm then combining into a big block right here, and then just using one paint for that big block to completely paint the block blue. So the way paint works is it sort of paints the whole thing regardless of its size and its volume with one paint usage. So obviously you can get way more efficient with your paint if you start painting bigger volumes and then cutting it up into smaller pieces. So this is something I kind of wanted to give you as like an insight you could use maybe in your more advanced factory to conserve even more paint. That's a wrap for this episode of Modulus Academy. Make sure you're following us so you don't miss the next one. See you on the factory floor.